In the early 90s, this company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Its car sales had dropped by half. Their iconic reputation was under threat. The assembly line was idle and management was forced to keep it running by assembling competitors' products. Industry giants were licking their chops, imagining how they would buy one of the last independent luxury car manufacturers for a bargain price. And then something remarkable happened. The new management not only managed to solve the inherited problems, but also made the family business incredibly profitable. So much so that its owners, representatives of the third generation of the dynasty, became billionaires. So much so that the small company practically bought one of the largest automotive groups in the world. This was far from the first miracle in Porsche's history. In its long and mostly glorious history, there have been brilliant innovations by outstanding engineers and the creation of a design that has stood the test of decades. There were also dark chapters in its history, but nevertheless, Porsche remains Porsche, and Porsche is a legend. Today, Maffersdorf no longer exists. This small town has become a suburb of the larger Czech city of Liberec, located not far from the German border. But on one of its streets, there still stands an unremarkable white house adorned with a sign reading Anton Porsche. This is the birthplace of Ferdinand Porsche, the founder of the future sports car manufacturer. Anton Porsche was his father, the owner of a tinware workshop. The family, who had lived in Bohemia for generations, this is what the region was called at the time, was not wealthy, but it would also be hard to call them part of the urban lower class. They were solid craftsmen respected by their neighbors. Ferdinand's father managed to serve as captain of the volunteer fire brigade and even as vice mayor of the town, making him the second most important person in Maffersdorf. Ferdinand Porsche was expected to follow in his father's footsteps and become a master tinsmith. But the boy was born in an era of great scientific discoveries, and one of them captivated him especially strongly. Strangely enough, it wasn't the automobile. Carl Benz built his Benz patent motorwagen when Ferdinand was 10 years old. Such innovations would not reach Maffersdorf for quite some time. For now, the young Porsche was fascinated by electricity. Ferdinand was self-taught. He attended evening classes at the local trade school, but he never received a higher or even a specialized secondary engineering education. All the more remarkable then are the heights he would later achieve. For now, his first accomplishment was building an electric generator for his own home. For a long time, the current Porsche House Museum on the outskirts of Liberec was the only building in Maffersdorf whose windows at night were lit not by kerosene lamps, but by electric ones. In the end, his son's technical abilities convinced Anton Porsche to accept his choice. The family maintained strict discipline, but Ferdinand absolutely did not want to become a tinsmith. Instead, he relocated to the city of Vienna, the dazzling capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where he got a job as an apprentice at one of the prestigious local power companies. 4 years later, at just 22, he became the head of the testing laboratory there. His engineering genius ultimately broke through his provincial background and lack of formal education, allowing him to find his true calling. It was in Vienna, one of Europe's largest metropolises, that Ferdinand Porsche first saw a real automobile. The number of companies in Vienna experimenting with self-propelled vehicles was steadily increasing. In 1898, Porsche turned 23 and began a new career at Ludwig Lohner's company. Previously, this entrepreneur had supplied horse-drawn carriages to the imperial court, but he was quick to notice the emergence of a potential threat to his business and chose to believe in it. At Lohner's company, Porsche headed a new division in his previous field of electrical engineering, the production of electric vehicles. Yes, Porsche started working on them 120 years before it truly became fashionable. At the young age of 24, he designed his very first automobile, the one-ton Lohner Porsche. It was a real mechanical beast, boasting up to 7 horsepower, a top speed of over 50 kilometers per hour, and a total driving range of 50 kilometers. The front wheels were powered directly by electric motors, and the massive battery pack weighed a substantial 410 kilograms. But it was a true, fully functional electric car, which one of the leading technical publications of that era even described as an outstanding and remarkable innovation. The magazine wasn't lying. Its premiere at the 1900 World's Fair in Paris caused a sensation, and it sold 300 units. Quite a lot for those times. At the same time, it was more expensive than models with internal combustion engines, so the first Porsche model was mainly bought by aristocrats and wealthy Viennese industrialists. Thus, Porsche, without even realizing it, identified the target audience for his future company. but it was still a long way from being established. For now, Ferdinand continued to work as an employee for other pioneers of the automotive industry. For Ludwig Lohner, the engineer also managed to create the Semper Vivus model. Struggling with the limited range of early 20th century electric cars, Porsche came up with the idea of combining an internal combustion engine and electric motors in a single vehicle. The Semper Vivus became the world's first hybrid car. Porsche would not present another hybrid until 2010, 110 years later. And the inventor of this revolutionary system, having gotten married, continued to build his career. In 1906, he left Lohner for the Austrian branch of Daimler, where he finally began to gradually lose interest in electricity. After all, the technologies of that time could not offer lightweight and capacious batteries. Meanwhile, oil production was increasing, gasoline was becoming cheaper, and the internal combustion engine was convincingly outperforming its competitors. The 20th century was its century. While working at Austro-Daimler, Porsche held the key positions of technical director and chief designer. He was involved in nearly everything, clearly demonstrating the vast range of his engineering talent, racing sports cars, fire trucks and ambulances, aircraft engines, engines for airships, and of course, regular automobiles, as well as specialized military equipment, which in 1914 was heavily demanded by the various fronts of the First World War. His Landwehr train, developed for the Austrian army, caused a sensation. It was a freight train capable of moving both on rails and on regular roads. The motorcar was equipped with an internal combustion engine, and each of the trailers was additionally fitted with electric motors. In other words, the trailers were self-propelled. The Landwehr train, capable of transporting up to 30 tons of cargo, impressed many with its innovation, but it was especially memorable to one Austrian corporal named Adolf, who encountered it in the fields. This impression would later play a significant role in Porsche's fate. The First World War was followed by the collapse of empires. New states were formed, along with complete political and economic chaos. When the situation stabilized a bit, the chief engineer of Daimler's Austrian branch finally caught the attention of the company's head office. In 1923, Ferdinand Porsche moved to Stuttgart. There, he became the technical director and head of the design bureau of the now merged Daimler-Benz company. He coordinated all of the corporation's engineering activities, but paid special attention to the first supercars with the three-pointed star on the hood. In 1928, Daimler and Porsche parted ways. The economic situation in Germany worsened. The manufacturer shut down its racing program, and Ferdinand was not used to economizing. His grandson later recalled, "It was always said that he was the most expensive engineer because he never built the same car for years, but constantly changed it, and that was very costly." For about a year, Porsche was designing a luxury convertible for the Austrian company Steyr, but the Great Depression finished it off as well. Porsche saw this crisis as an incentive to finally start his own business. He returned to Stuttgart and on April 25, 1931, founded the company Limited Liability Company of Honorary Dr. Ferdinand Porsche for the production of engines and vehicles and the provision of consulting services. Ferdinand Porsche owned 70% of the company. His partner was his own son-in-law, the husband of his daughter Louise, the successful Viennese lawyer Anton Pieck. Later, he would handle all the legal affairs of the company. For the role of the second partner, they invited the entrepreneur and race car driver Adolf Rosenberger, who provided the necessary funding. Porsche needed the money. The early 1930s became a time of the most severe economic crisis for Germany. The company, where the founder had gathered many of his former colleagues from previous workplaces, survived on occasional orders until, in 1933, Adolf Hitler took office as Reich Chancellor, and just a month later, the Führer announced the launch of a large-scale program to develop the automotive industry. Soon after, construction of the autobahns began as well. Porsche saw this as an opportunity. He first met Hitler back in 1926 at a car race. But in May 1933, he found himself at a reception with him in the Reich Chancellery. During this meeting, the former Austrian corporal vividly recalled the innovative motor trains developed by Porsche that had so deeply impressed him during the First World War. Hitler had a great weakness for Porsche. The Führer considered him a genius, which was partly true, wrote historian Hans Mommsen. Whether Porsche considered Hitler a genius is another question. His son, also named Ferdinand, or Ferry as he was called in the family, claimed that no, he did not. Political views played absolutely no role for my father, since any regime that allowed him to create freely suited him. Or more precisely, he was indifferent to it, Ferry wrote in his memoirs. Be that as it may, the founder of Porsche saw cooperation with Hitler as a chance to realize his long-held idea. Porsche first began thinking about designing a small displacement compact car that would be affordable for the average person back in the 1920s. While working at the Austrian company Austro-Daimler, Ferdinand was approached by one of the company's shareholders, who had recently returned from the United States. He asked the engineer two simple questions. Why do you always make cars so heavy? Why not design a small maneuverable car, like Ford does? Porsche was in fact a specialist in expensive sports cars. He knew how to make them, and that was what he was valued for. In many ways, his reputation as a talented engineer was built precisely on racing cars. Racing was in the public eye, people loved it, and the criterion for evaluating results was simple. If a car wins competitions, it means it's good. But the idea of a people's car never left Porsche for more than 10 years. He repeatedly tried to sell this idea to someone, but for various reasons, it never worked out. Such a person was only found in 1933. That person was Adolf Hitler. He demanded that German engineers within 5 years develop a design and set up production of a mass-market compact car. During this time, German builders were to lay out a network of high-speed highways across the country. Hitler rebuked the industrialists who believed that the automobile was an elite item. This brand new vehicle, which the country was about to create, had to be accessible and affordable. The retail price could not exceed 1,000 German marks. It was supposed to be the people's car, the Volkswagen. The bosses of German automobile companies did not like Ferdinand Porsche, especially at Daimler-Benz. But Porsche's prototypes of the people's car, which already had the distinctive shape reminiscent of a May Beetle, appealed to the Führer. In 1938, right in the heart of Germany, far from its borders, construction began on a grand automobile factory, which for a long time would become the largest in the world. A city was founded nearby where the factory workers were to live. This marked the beginning of the Volkswagen Group and Wolfsburg. Before the start of World War II, the factory was not able to begin operations. It was only partially built, and instead of producing the people's car, it started manufacturing its military modification. Complete full-scale civilian production was officially established only in 1946. The car was named the Volkswagen Beetle. Unfortunately, Porsche's collaboration with Hitler did not end there. By this time, Porsche had its own factory in Zuffenhausen near Stuttgart, where it produced specialized military vehicles. On June 21, 1941, Ferdinand Porsche was appointed head of the Tank Armaments Commission. The company's internal design bureau developed and produced its own heavy tank projects. Porsche even presented his own version of the heavy Tiger tank. It was not adopted for service, but later the Ferdinand artillery installation was produced based on it. Ferdinand Porsche understood that after the defeat of the Third Reich, the victors would have many questions for him. In 1944, he moved the company's design office to the small Austrian town of Gmünd. And in July 1945, the head of Porsche was arrested along with his son-in-law Anton Piech and his son Ferry, his closest associates. The first Porsche car was officially released in August 1947. The Allies were more interested in the engineer's technical abilities. The French intended to use his expertise to revive their Renault brand. And Ferdinand really did have to consult for this company. While Ferdinand Porsche was in prison, his daughter Louise managed the company. In Gmünd, Porsche produced anything for which they could find orders, from lawnmowers to water turbines. A good source of support came from licensing fees for the production of the Beetle in Wolfsburg. Volkswagen paid the design bureau 5 German marks for each car produced. Ferry Porsche also did not waste any time, having been released earlier than his father. The Porsche family convincingly disproves the notion that genius skips a generation. It was Ferry who designed the Porsche 356, the first model that the company developed, produced, and sold independently. And this model turned out to be a success. For the first time, it established the recognizable image of a compact sports car, which would become classic for Porsche. By this point, the family's business had effectively split. Ferdinand Porsche's health deteriorated during his imprisonment, and he withdrew from business, including creative work. In fact, while Porsche remained a single-family firm, it was controlled in equal shares by 2 branches of the dynasty. The first branch is the Piechs. Louise Piech, Ferdinand's daughter, together with her husband Anton, retained control over Austria, where they built a huge dealership business that effectively controlled the supply of all Volkswagen and Porsche vehicles in southern Europe. Ferry's son took Germany for himself. He returned once again to Stuttgart, where, at the old factory in Zuffenhausen, he began production of the Porsche 356. The model cost 3 times more than the Beetle and almost as much as the most expensive Mercedes sedan, but it became a symbol of the German economic miracle and the return to peaceful life. "How did you come up with the idea to build this car?" Ferdinand Porsche was once asked. "For me, it was simply a personal hobby. I was designing a high-performance vehicle for myself," he replied. Original production of the high-performance vehicle for himself began in the spring of 1950. Ferry expected to sell 500 Porsche 356s. In the end, about 80,000 of them were produced. Small but striking and most importantly fast, Porsches became a symbol of success. Their owners feel like part of an exclusive club for independent yet self-assured people. It's no surprise that the first associations of brand enthusiasts appeared as early as 1952, and now there are hundreds of them. The world learned about the German company on September 30th, 1955, when the idol of a generation, the iconic actor James Dean, died in a car crash while driving a Porsche 550 Spider. The investigation into the accident showed that neither Dean nor Porsche was at fault, but many fans of the American Idol wanted a sports car from the same company. The Porsche 356 became the company's first, but not its main hit. By the 60s, thanks to sales of this model, the company's turnover had grown to 100 million German marks. Not bad for a company that, just 10 years earlier, had been happy to receive orders for lawnmowers from Austrian farmers. But the model lineup, which essentially still consisted of the same car designed by Ferdinand Porsche back in 1948, was in need of an update. A new premiere from the manufacturer was long awaited, but the wait was worth it. The creation of the new model became a demonstration of the idea that genius runs even in the grandchildren of geniuses. After all, the design, in which you can see the lines of the Beetle, was created by yet another Ferdinand Porsche, nicknamed the Kid, the grandson of the dynasty's founder and son of Ferry. And the engine was handled by a young engineer, Ferdinand Porsche, another grandson of the elder Porsche and the son of his daughter Louise. In 1963, at the Frankfurt Motor Show, Porsche unveiled the car whose 8th generation is still being produced today. An absolute classic with which the very name Porsche became associated, the 911. The triumph of this model, against which all subsequent developments of the company would be compared, seemed to demonstrate that the company was in safe hands. The third generation of the family, with the creation of the 911, seemed to have convincingly proven its professional competence. By 1972, the company's turnover had grown to 425 million German marks. It was selling 14,000 cars a year. However, in the early 70s, representatives of the third generation left the company. This was a coordinated decision. By this point, contradictions had accumulated between the Peaches and the Porsches. The former were the senior line, but they lacked the most important thing for a family business, the right last name. In order not to make the business a hostage to their ambitions, after heated arguments, the heirs came to an agreement. They did the most important thing. They gave Porsche the necessary impetus for development. From then on, bearers of the Peak and Porsche surnames would no longer hold managerial positions in the joint enterprise. The company would be run by professional managers, preferably those who had come up through the ranks of the company. And the first results of this experiment turned out to be paradoxical. On the one hand, the company successfully weathered the challenges of the 70s and their energy crisis. By all logic, it was sports cars that should have fallen victim to the rising gasoline prices. But by 1980, the manufacturer's turnover had grown to 1,350 million marks, tripling in 8 years. On the other hand, the models developed under hired directors turned out, at best, to be controversial. The Porsche 914, a joint project with Volkswagen, and the Porsche 924. Even the powerful racing Carrera RS received a mixed reaction and at times even sparked a wave of outrage among the brand's fans. But sales of the 911 model were going very well. In the 80s, they placed their bets on this updated classic, while simultaneously continuing to experiment with a variety of new models. The company's income kept growing, but all available funds were invested in development. As a result, at the beginning of the next decade, the company found itself in a serious crisis. Porsche's sales had already started to decline at the end of the 80s. Previously extremely conservative when it came to premieres, the company ended up with a model lineup broader than that of some major automotive groups. Huge sums were invested in its creation, but at the same time, the number of buyers was decreasing. While in the mid-80s Porsche produced 50,000 cars a year, by the end of the decade this number had dropped by half. The Formula One team project also ended in failure. There was nothing to keep the assembly line running, so the company's management was forced to assemble Daimler-Benz Mercedes cars in Zuffenhausen. The elite factory was reduced to screwdriver assembly of other brands. Headquarters began to receive frequent visits from high-profile guests, top management from automotive groups in Germany, Italy, the United States, and Japan. The automotive market was rife with rumors about the inevitable takeover of the still independent brand. Salvation had a name, and that name was Wendelin Wiedeking, the former head of production, whom the PX and the Porsches appointed as the new CEO in '92 in a last-ditch effort to save the company. Wiedeking turned out to be exactly the right person for the job. In just a couple of years, he radically reduced production costs by conducting a complete audit of technological processes. He shortened the assembly time for cars, brought in Japanese consultants, and eliminated unnecessary models from the lineup. Most importantly, he launched a roadster on the market called the Porsche Boxster, which became the long-awaited new hit. Sales of this sports car for slimmer wallets broke records. He was also helped by the good old 911 model. As a result, by 1998, Porsche's turnover had grown to 5 billion marks. The dark times were behind them. It was under Wiedeking that Porsche became the most profitable car company in the world. That is, among all manufacturers, it earned the most per car produced. The launch of the Cayenne model in 2002, a new joint project with Volkswagen, brought in billions of dollars. With it, the company entered the crossover market and discovered new horizons. It turned out that these were exactly the kind of Porsches that customers in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and America had been waiting for. Even longtime fans of the brand started buying sporty SUVs, but as a second car. To produce the Cayenne, they even had to build a second factory in Leipzig. The manufacturer began to accumulate enormous funds. However, the company decided to use them in a rather peculiar, even adventurous way. In 2005, Porsche began buying up shares of its longtime partner, the very largest automotive group in the world. Essentially a small company, Porsche decided to take over Volkswagen, a company 14 times larger in revenue and producing 60 times more cars. It could have been a classic, beautiful story about David defeating Goliath, one that could have deeply inspired countless business books. By 2009, Porsche had increased its stake in Volkswagen to 51%. But that was not enough. They needed 75% because the government of Lower Saxony held a blocking stake, which meant all management decisions had to be coordinated with them. But Porsche was not so lucky. To a large extent, this was the fault of the company's management. For several years, they had been investing billions in profits from car sales into playing the stock market, buying and selling options on Volkswagen shares once again. These actions, which some might call speculation, were initially quite successful. They brought Porsche additional billions. These profits were again invested in options. Journalists even called the sports car manufacturer the most successful hedge fund in the world, for whom the car business had become secondary. The company's managers could not have predicted that a global financial crisis would break out in 2008, or they hoped they would achieve their goal in time. They didn't make it. The sports car market collapsed along with the onset of the economic depression. Many potential buyers postponed purchasing new Boxsters and Cayennes until better times. In addition, the company found itself burdened with enormous debts taken on to acquire Volkswagen. It had no way to pay back the 10 billion euros. Porsche found itself in a remarkable situation. The banks could demand repayment of the debts at any moment. This would have been followed by the sale of Porsche to an outside investor, and in that case, the founding family would have lost everything. But, fortunately for Porsche, help came from the Goliath it had tried to swallow, Volkswagen, which by that time had already been led for 2 decades by an old acquaintance, Ferdinand Porsche, the very son of Louis Porsche and grandson of Ferdinand Porsche, who in the 1960s had developed the engine for the first generation of the Porsche 911. After the PX and Porsches agreed in the early 70s to bring in outside managers to run the family business, each member of the third generation embarked on their own distinct paths. Ferdinand Porsche went to Audi and built a successful and brilliant career there, rising from an engineer to the head of the company in Ingolstadt. The brand and the company belonged to Volkswagen. Therefore, when the parent group needed a new leader, Porsche was invited to take the position. Thus, Porsche's grandson became the head of the automotive giant that was in fact created by his father. It was Porsche who rendered Porsche his final service. He agreed to buy the Porsche factory and brand from the holding company for 8.5 billion euros. This resolved the debt problems of his own family company and allowed them to get out of the risky stock market venture. At the same time, Piëch allowed Porsche to remain independent within the Volkswagen Group structure. And the final touch to this brilliant operation is the following nuance. 53% of Volkswagen Group remains owned by the Porsche holding company, which means it stays under the control of the Piëch-Porsche dynasty. Simply put, as a company, Porsche failed to take over Volkswagen. On the contrary, in the end, Volkswagen absorbed Porsche, but the family still gained control over both manufacturers. It's just that in this case, the Piëch branch, led by Ferdinand, outplayed their cousins from the Porsche branch and showed who is really in charge. Porsche is still doing well 13 years after that merger. At the end of that crisis, the Panamera, Macan and Taycan models were successfully launched on the market. The last of these became Porsche's first electric car in over 100 years. In 2017, the 1 millionth Porsche 911 was produced. The brand's sales exceeded 300,000 cars per year. The construction of a new plant in Malaysia was announced. In 2022, about 12.5% of the manufacturer's shares were listed on the stock exchange. The company's market capitalization was estimated at around 90 billion euros. Later, the shares dropped in price, but the representatives of the peak Porsche dynasty, descendants of Bohemian tinsmiths, still became very wealthy people, and the creation of the family patriarch remains a legend. Despite all the scandals, crises, mergers and acquisitions, in the end, that's what matters most to their loyal customers. Thank you for watching. Like this video if you want to learn more about the history of major companies and suggest your topics for future episodes in the comments. And finally, here are 5 interesting facts about Porsche. For his honeymoon in the city of Nice, Ferdinand Porsche traveled in a hybrid vehicle of his own design. However, it is unknown how far the car traveled using the gasoline engine and how far it went on electric power. In 1932, Porsche was personally invited to the Soviet Union to lead the development of their automotive industry. The engineer declined the invitation because he believed that at his advanced age, he would no longer be able to learn the Russian language. Despite his enthusiasm for the idea of a people's car, Porsche himself preferred large, expensive vehicles. During the Great Patriotic War, Soviet tanks were equipped with torsion bar suspension systems from Porsche. The last Volkswagen Beetle, whose prototype was developed at Porsche's bureau, rolled off the assembly line in Mexico only in 2003. More than 21.5 million units were produced. The design proposed by Porsche turned out to be remarkably enduring.